Dixie here. Today I want to talk to you about more of the dumb mistakes I've made while backpacking. I already have a few videos on this topic, so that just goes to show that it doesn't matter how long you do something, you will never be just perfect at it. You can still mess up. I do like putting these mistakes out there, not because I want folks to know exactly how much I mess up, but because sometimes you can learn not the hard way, so I'm hoping this will help people to do that. Mistake number one is holding my trekking poles in a way that could kill me. For years, I've hiked with my trekking poles tucked up under my arm with the tips facing behind me, mainly if I'm doing something else with my hands, like eating a snack or recording some kind of critter, maybe checking gut hook or whatever else. But my hands are occupied, so it seems like, oh, I'll just keep moving down the trail and just tuck these guys right up under my arm. But when I was back on the Pacific Crest Trail in 2019, when I took my mom and Fancy May with me, and I had just been texting my sister, and I had my trekking poles up under my arm, and I tripped on a root. Naturally, when people trip and they are falling forward, they tend to put out their arms to try to catch themselves. When I did that, my trekking poles flew out from under my arm. The handle part of the trekking pole hit the ground first, so the tip was facing upward and my chest went into it. When I landed on the tips, thankfully, the entire pole did not just plunge into my chest, but the tips did take out a chunk of skin even with me wearing a shirt. So I imagine if I had been in something like a tank top and it was bare skinned, it would have been a lot worse. Thankfully, I didn't learn the super hard way on this one, but even going forward and trying not to do that, I've caught myself doing it, so it has been a hard habit to break. Mistake number two is actually something that y'all have pointed out to me in comments of videos, and that is that I'm bad about not moving dead leaves away from my stove when I'm cooking. It seems like this would be intuitive and something that you would easily think about, but I think that it doesn't click to me in the same way as like an open fire, you know, like I'm burning wood. The backpacking stove, although I have knocked over my pot before and spilled my food on the ground, I don't believe that I have ever knocked over the fuel canister and the stove itself, therefore putting the flame on the ground. Now, that's not to say that it could not happen, because it certainly can. So I am grateful that y'all have pointed that out, because in the instance that I did knock over the canister and the stove itself and then had this hot flame on dead leaves, it could light up and really create a big problem. So anyway, that is something that I will be mindful about going forward, and I have tried to think about that ever since y'all mentioned it. Mistake number three is forgetting my emergency blanket on like 90% of my backpacking trips. Obviously, carrying an emergency blanket is a good idea, and I like the idea of it, and I prefer to have one with me in case I need it. But despite liking the idea of carrying an emergency blanket, probably somewhat due to poor organization of my gear, which I have now remedied, but also just sheer forgetfulness, I have left it behind on most of my backpacking trips. This finally came around to bite me a little bit, because over the summer I used my emergency blanket when I was simulating an unplanned overnighter, testing out my day hiking gear. I used the emergency blanket that I had that night, and it was the only one that I had. And unfortunately, I did not replace it for my next backpacking trip, which ended up being to Idaho in the Sawtooth Wilderness. As many of y'all know, I ended up being rescued by search and rescue on that trip. I called for help on my inReach, and when I saw the helicopter appear and they were kind of flying over seemingly in circles, I thought, okay, they're trying to locate me. So I tried to think, how can I make myself stand out here? And if I had had that emergency blanket, I think because it has that reflective type surface, that I would have been spotted a lot more easily. Now, they did end up seeing me. I was waving around my tent, and even though it kind of blended in with the colors around me, that little bit of movement, the lady said she did finally see it. Now, I would have been okay in the end on this trip anyway, because I called for search and rescue with my inReach, which gives them your exact coordinates, so they would have found me. but who knows when you might need it for signaling search and rescue that is looking for you, but that you didn't actually call, and so you really need them to see you. And there are also some emergency blankets that have an orange side to it, so that would also be useful for standing out. Or, you know, for its main purpose of being cold, you might need to wrap up in it because you fell down in a creek crossing and your sleeping bag is soaked and now you've got to make it through a freezing night. So anyway, better safe than sorry with these. They only cost a few dollars and weigh anywhere from like 1 to 3 ounces depending on which one you get. Mistake number 4 is another one that y'all so kindly pointed out, and that was me taking the Zpacks Duplex to hike the Lagavegr Trail in Iceland. Many of y'all pointed out how dumb I was to do this, and what I want y'all to understand is I know how dumb I was to do that, and I really just wanted to see how well the Zpacks Duplex would hold up in those conditions. I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew it was gonna be windy and cold and miserably rainy. But I also knew that every place I was gonna be camping on the Lagavegr Trail had a structure, and yes, they're paid beds, so they were full as far as getting a bed and camping in the structure. In case of emergency, I could have absolutely walked inside the building and slept with my back leaned up against the wall if I needed to. I just really wanted to see how the Zpacks Duplex would hold up in those conditions, and except for one night, it worked out pretty well. That one night, I will give you, was very miserable, and I stayed up having to pick my trekking pole up off the ground most of the night because the wind kept blowing it out. But it was for science, okay? But I do think that it is important that people realize what they're getting themselves into with that trail, and that, you know, using caution in your gear selection is certainly important. So I could have done a better job of pointing that out. Mistake number 5 is hiking with earbuds in both ears. I have mentioned this in multiple videos, but somehow I failed to point out that I had previously made this mistake. I like listening to music and podcasts when I backpack. Now, there are some people who think that you are morally inferior if you get bored listening to the sounds of birds and wind, but when you backpack for miles and miles and miles, it's okay if you start feeling lonely, especially, you know, if you're alone and you want to be comforted by hearing a human's voice. But you got to be smart about it. Wearing earbuds in both of your ears takes away your situational awareness because there could be a rattlesnake rattling and you might not hear it. And that was actually the first example that was given to me when I decided I needed to stop hiking with 2 earbuds in. A hiker said that that happened to them. They were going over some rocks in Pennsylvania, and I don't know if they tripped and one came out or if they thought they heard something, but for whatever reason, they ended up taking out one of their earbuds and there was a rattlesnake rattling nearby. So they're like, oh my God, you know, it was scary, and having both in is a bad idea. But there are also other things that could happen, like a rock slide could be happening and you don't hear it, or even just common courtesy of another hiker behind you on trail trying to pass and you can't hear them saying, excuse me, or, you know, walking up on you. So if you're gonna listen to music or a podcast, everyone will definitely appreciate you doing so with earbuds so they don't have to listen to it too. But the safest way to do so is with 1 earbud in, 1 earbud out, and the volume of whatever you're listening to as low as it can be, with you still being able to hear it. That way you can still be aware of what's going on around you. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you today on mistakes that I've made. I'm sure that I've made others while backpacking, but that's all I can think of for now. So if you have any mistakes that you've made on trail and you think people can learn from them, please feel free to share that in the comments below. Happy New Year. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see y'all next time.